Hello, and welcome to another Website Depot podcast. As ever, I'm your host, Greg Benevent, and I'm once again lucky to be joined by Veronika from Scope Environmental. How you doing, Veronika?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me, Greg.
So I know we talked a little bit about what was coming up in the pre-talk there, but I'd love to have you introduce for the listeners and watchers at home exactly what you came here to discuss today.
I'm going to be giving you some information on how to do your homework for your property insurance policy. I am not an insurance agent. I'm not an insurance broker. I do not work for the insurance industry in any way. I haven't been certified in any way. The information I'm going to be sharing with you today is derived from our experience in working with the insurance industry, our experience in working with policyholders, and their experiences in working with insurance companies. So this is what we've learned over the years and the mishaps and better parts that we've seen. So I'd like to share it with your viewers so that they too know how to read their insurance policy and how to understand it and how to know what it is they're buying and why.
Oh, geez, absolutely. Yes. I know I personally never look enough at the insurance policy. So like what, where would you start with that? I mean, is it a question of like, hey, should I even have insurance? Necessarily.
Right. So it's important to know that people usually buy insurance for three different reasons. If they're a renter, their landlord might be requiring that they have a policy in order to rent or lease a specific unit. If they are purchasing a property or have a mortgage on a property, their lender will require that they have a property insurance policy. And then there's people that may have a property that is paid off. They own it free and clear, and they wonder that now that they do have their property paid off, should they even bother with insurance? They may never have had a hazardous or an emergency property situation in their home. So they said, after all these years of never having used this policy that I paid for, do I really need one?
Certainly.
So those are the questions that I'd like to answer for people today so that they can decide for themselves if they're going to have one as a requirement, what they should know about it, and if they don't have to have one as a part of a requirement, why they should or should not have one, basically.
Gotcha.
What they should know about an insurance policy that'll help them make the decision on whether to purchase one if they're not required to.
I mean, where do you start with something like that? Is it a question of knowing if your policy's up to date or what you need, or where would you even begin?
So the first thing you need to know is if you already have an insurance policy, whether a renter's policy or you have one for your property that you own, you should find out if your property is up to date. Once a year, your insurance broker will call you and ask you to review your policy. A lot of people are like, oh, yeah, whatever. I don't really care. Just make sure that it covers me and the lender doesn't say anything or the landlord doesn't say anything. And that can be completely unintentional, but totally irresponsible of anyone who lives in a property as an adult. Here's why. You want to make sure you have enough coverage. If you don't keep your policy up to date, it may no longer cover your dwelling. So I've seen situations where usually with older people that own property, they'll have an insurance policy, but for the last, 10, 15, 20 years, they've just paid for it. And they've never answered that call of the insurance broker trying to update their policy. What's happened over the years is their property has gone up in value, but the replacement value of approval on their policy remains where it was the last time they updated the policy. So if they do have an emergency situation, if there's a fire, if there's a water loss, it'll only cover them up to the amounts that were listed on their last policy, which may no longer be enough for 10, 15, 20 years down the line, even 5 years down the line. The real estate market, as we know in Southern California, where we are, fluctuates. There was a time where things were down and then things went way up. And if you never checked through your policy, then it still covers you for the old property value. And God forbid there's a fire and the whole thing is lost, you will not get the new replacement value of your home. So for the first reason, make sure your policy is up to date so that it can, in fact, reflect the current value of your home for replacement purposes. Not just the entire home, but also the structure as a whole, walls, floors, whatever is inside a property, making sure that those things are able to be replaced in case of an emergency.
That just anyone, even well-meaning people, could absolutely fall into. The idea of, just you could even, the most conscientious kind of homeowner would just be like, oh, okay, it's my insurance policy. I've been paying it. So naturally it should be matching what I'm doing now.
Yeah, and that's what we hear a lot of, which brings me to my next point, is understanding the different parts of your policy, of your insurance policy, so that you know exactly what it is you are paying for and how much coverage you have for each one. So for a renter, some of these may not be as applicable. They're mostly for homeowners. There are a couple of sections in here that are applicable to renters.
Great.
The first and foremost, as I mentioned in the previous part, is the structure and dwelling portion. This is the part that covers the actual structure of your property. So for both emergency services and any subsequent repairs. For example, when there's a water damage claim or situation inside a home, we come in, we remove affected materials, drywall, flooring, insulation, what have you. That's the emergency portion of it. That's the cleanup and drying of everything out. The second part is building it all back, putting it all back the way that it was. That's the repair portion of the policy. So both of those fall into the structure and dwelling. Again, this is why it's very important to keep the policy up to date so that the policy reflects the current value of what those things are and can, in fact, pay for them to be replaced.
Okay. So you're saying, should someone not keep up with that policy, disaster could strike, Scope goes in to fix it and all that, and it turns out that the repair and or the remediation would not be covered by a policy that was not updated? Not
necessarily not covered. There just may not be enough money to cover it because the monies are based on what things used to cost the last time you updated your policy.
Okay.
So if prices on materials and other things have gone up, you may not have enough coverage. You'll have some coverage. I had a situation where a policyholder had about $25,000 in coverage for everything they needed to do with the home. They had a large water damage claim that flooded the entire first floor of the home. And as you can imagine, $25,000 will not cover that. It will not cover all the floors. It will not cover the walls. It will not cover the cabinets. And then the homeowner is stuck in a situation where the insurance company will write out the check for $25,000 and they sit down and look at it and they don't know what to do with it, where to spend it first, and what they're going to live with not having had enough coverage.
Yeah, that is a truly awful scenario. This all makes a lot of sense.
The next part is what you want to be aware of is the contents inside your property. So it's anything and everything that's not the structure, meaning this is your furniture, this is your plates, this is your clothing, this is knickknacks, this is everything that you've purchased and put inside your home. A lot of people don't realize that over many years, they acquire things. We all acquire things, whether they be bedding or furniture or shelves or plates or knickknacks or picture frames or anything. Pictures hanging on the walls, televisions, whatever. You've acquired many things, no matter how small your space small or large, your space may be. Some people may consider themselves minimalists, but trust me, that's a very small category of people. So most people have acquired a ton of things. What you want to watch out for, or be aware of rather, is the contents coverage for your policy. So on your policy, there is a section of monies that are allocated for your contents. Again, I've had experiences where people have completely neglected this portion of their policy and thought, oh, well, I don't know, maybe I have $10,000 worth of things in here. And that sounds like a lot of money. However, it's not just a matter of the things that are there. It's a matter of cleaning them, inventorying them, storing them, and possibly having to replace them. So $10,000 is not going to cover it. Chances are that if you have a 3-bedroom home or something like that, $20,000 isn't going to cover it. You're going to need more. That is something that you should discuss with your insurance agent or broker, and they will advise you on how much would be enough. They'll discuss that with you. You'll explain how many bedrooms, how many whatever you have in your home, how many rooms you have in general, and they can suggest how much you should have. One other point I'd like to bring up, along with keeping your policy up to date, sometimes we think that the insurance brokers may be giving us a call because they want it updated because they're going to make more money on this. And it's true, I believe there might be some sort of a commission structure on that. However, they are doing you a service that you definitely want to making sure that you have enough coverage in case disaster strikes. You hope it never does, but you need enough coverage. Do you have any questions about that part?
I was just thinking about it. I mean, I don't know if it's necessarily a question I had so much. It was just a consideration of the full scope of what all that would entail. I guess on some level, I personally had and maybe this is just me, I'd never assumed that the contents part of it had been nearly quite as encompassing as you laid it out to be. Like, I never would have assumed that, knickknacks and bedding maybe, but not, clothing or picture frames or all the wonderful examples you gave would also be covered under the policy of contents. But from what you're saying, it almost seems like that's a good deal. I mean, obviously you're not selling insurance. You're not here to give people advice for how to do their insurance, but that's, if you're sitting there listening, watching this thing, hey, and you haven't had this conversation with your insurance agent or your broker, or whoever, this is a conversation worth having. The longer it's been since you did it, maybe the sooner you should have it.
And definitely, there are other parts you should also be considering, such as additional living expenses. Similar to the contents, if a disaster were to strike and you had to move out of your home, your contents would be inventoried, packed up, and moved out, stored elsewhere. That contents portion would also have to cover the storage of your items for the duration until you're able to move back. These things, depending on the scope of the claim, can take anywhere from 2 months, they can take 6 months, they can take a year. And so your contents are being stored elsewhere. Also, if, let's say, your kitchen is affected, you cannot live in the home if your kitchen is affected. You need to be able to eat. Or if your floors are removed, you cannot live in a home where there's no floors in the common areas. Nobody's walking on concrete. So with that being said, there's the next portion of your policy, which is your additional living expenses, called ALE.
Okay.
You should review this portion of the policy with your insurance broker or agent to make sure that it covers enough for you to be able to rent a fully furnished home of similar size in a not too large of a radius away from your own home. So in your neighborhood, within a few miles or so, because what you don't want is, sure, we can rent a 3-bedroom home over there, but that changes your commute, that changes the schools for your children, that changes how far you are from your parents or anything else, other activities you do, going to the gym or what have you.
Anything.
You want to be able to rent it in a reasonable radius away from your own home to make sure that you can still keep life as normal as possible while all of this is happening in your house or in your residence.
No, that makes so much sense. I mean, the idea is that by having this insurance, it feels like in a very real way, it's keeping this, some kind of disaster from, I hate to almost use this as a pun, but seeping into every other aspect of your life. Whereas this is the way it's almost like, for lack of a better phrase, like an insurance for your way of life, for your day-to-day life kind of thing.
It covers so much more than just your property insurance. People think that it's just the house, but it's so much more, because this is where you spend your time. This is where you go home after work. This is where your life is, your children's life, your pets, everything else. And so this is this is where your comfort is. So you want to make sure that when you are reviewing your policy with your agent or broker, that you are considering how much, fully furnished rental properties are going for in your neighborhood. And you want to make sure that you have coverage for 6 months to a year. I would say a year, but at the very least 6 months of coverage, enough for that. Additional living expenses is also a situation where if the insurance company does not, or if you choose to move to a hotel because it's a more shorter term concern, they will pay for the hotel and possibly food like takeout and things like that. So that's where that goes. That's where that's covered also.
Obviously, everyone's situation is different and you never know when things are going to strike, et cetera, et cetera. But like, is there anything even like approaching a good rule of thumb as to how often you should, hey, maybe look at this insurance policy? Is it every couple years, every year, every 3 or 4 years?
It should be yearly, especially because over the course of a year, we may acquire new things, new art, new furniture. Over the course of a year, our family may grow or, kids may move out. And so you may or may not need a 3-bedroom house. You may need a 2-bedroom house, or maybe now you need a 4-bedroom house in order to accommodate for your family. Maybe another family member moves in with you indefinitely. And so this is something that you do want to review on a yearly basis. Yes.
Gotcha. Okay. I mean, yearly at the very least, or otherwise, it almost sounds like, either in anticipation of or reaction to a life change. Someone moving in and that changes, that kind of thing. Okay, no, that makes so much sense, Veronika.
So for renters, what's important is the contents and the additional living expense, because whoever the owner is, whoever the landlord is of the property that you're living in, they most likely carry the insurance for the dwelling itself. What their insurance will not cover is your contents inside your unit.
Right.
Their insurance will also not cover you moving out because it's not them living inside that property. You're a renter. So for your renter's policy, these 2 sections are very important for you. The contents is what you came in with and will probably leave with if you ever intend to leave the unit. The additional living expenses in case there is a problem inside the unit, there is a flood, a fire, any type of situation, you want to make sure that you have the coverage you need to rent a similar unit that is hopefully furnished so that you don't have to drag your own furniture to it.
Certainly. I love what you said because it felt like, for lack of a better phrase, it was you were establishing a minimum. I mean, I know so many renters that are just like, okay, if I have to get this insurance, I'm getting the bare minimum, period. But what you're saying is a redefinition of that bare minimum. It should be the bare minimum so that you can live in this other place, so that you aren't dragging your furniture through the street in the backseat of your car, that kind of thing.
There's one other part. I'm sure there's other parts that in the insurance policy that your broker can review with you. One other section that I find of interest and importance is mold coverage. Most new policies no longer offer mold coverage at all. Carriers do not sell mold coverage, most of them. However, there are older policies that hold mold coverage. They still have that section in there. So maybe 10, 15, 20 years ago, you purchased the policy and now the mold coverage is grandfathered in. You want to look that up and find out what the limits of that are in case you do run into a situation where you have to use that portion of the policy.
I see. Okay. But another hope for the best, expect the worst kind of thing.
That's kind of the nature of insurance in general, is we all hope we never have to use it, but we do buy health insurance, car insurance, property insurance. There's all these different types of insurances that we buy. We really should be more familiar with what it is we bought. If you were to buy a car, you'd like to know how the features inside that car work. You're going to buy insurance for a property that is worth, 500 and up thousands of dollars. You should know how that works in case something does happen. You should find out how all the features work inside.
Certainly. And I'm just thinking about what you said, and I, thinking of my own life where I'm like, I don't want to look at these things. I don't want to have to think about it. But just in having these conversations, it hits me that there's something so much more positive in looking at it and at least knowing versus the potentiality of, getting gobsmacked by it at some future point in the midst of a disaster.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's for, like you say, for lack of a better phrase, it's adulting. You know, we all have to be adults. You know,
Yes,
we come home
too.
after work and we're like, we've done our responsibility things for the day. But, you know, on the weekends, we have to do chores. We have to clean the house. We should look at our insurance policy and understand what it means and what's inside of it.
No, I like the way you put that as one more chore, one more, thing that the foundation for day-to-day living. That makes so much sense.
The next part is, what are the limits you should have? They're called limits for these parts of your policy.
Okay.
For the structure and dwelling portion, they should match the current value of your home. Your insurance broker will go over that with you, but there is a land value and a property value. So if you buy a property for $1 million, that doesn't necessarily mean that you need $1 million in coverage. The insurance will assess the value of the actual structure based on that, and that's what they will assign as the replacement value for the structure. That's what your emergency services and your repairs will come into play for. The next one, as we discussed, was contents. The limits for your contents, depending on how many bedrooms you have, I would recommend, if it's a 1-bedroom apartment, possibly I'd say $15,000 to $20,000 might be enough. Beyond that, I think you should really discuss it with your insurance broker, because they have the tools to calculate if you have 2 bedrooms, if you have 3 bedrooms, if you have multiple living areas, if you have a very large kitchen, if you have an outside area, because your outside contents are also contents, like your pool furniture, your outdoor furniture. In my experience during the fires specifically, there were not just damages to their interior structure and contents, there were damages to their exterior as well. Like their pools needed to be re-cleaned because of all the ash inside of it. Their furniture outside may have been damaged depending on how close the fire came, or possibly just needs to be cleaned. But it's not something that they want to do, as to why they file the claim, of course. So the professionals that are going to come in to do that cleaning, basically that portion of the policy, the contents portion of the policy, is what we'll be paying for those services. Cleaning services, all of that will be paid for by that portion. Cleaning your furniture, cleaning your pictures hanging on the walls, all of those things will be a part of the contents cleaning of your property. And as I mentioned earlier, the additional living expenses. What I've seen in different policies that we've been servicing for homeowners, sometimes they're unlimited. Sometimes people have $50,000. Sometimes people have $100,000. Sometimes people have more than that. Something that you should discuss with your broker based on what fully furnished properties of similar size cost to rent per month in your area. So you can look up Airbnbs and VRBOs and things like that and find out what do they cost per month. You'll be pretty surprised to see that it's actually quite a bit of money. It's like hotel rates in certain cases, depending on where people live. And so that's thousands and thousands of dollars per month. So you'll need to consider that. And the mold coverage, if you do have it, unfortunately at this point, there is no way to make it more. I would definitely not make it less if you have it, because it's kind of a unicorn nowadays to even have mold coverage in your policy. The last thing you should consider is your luxury goods. Different carriers, sometimes they'll include it with your regular policy. Other times you have to buy a separate policy for it. You should check with your insurance on that with your carrier. But what you want to make sure is that your luxury goods, such as expensive art and jewelry and things of that nature, have coverage as well, because it's not just a matter of theft. It's also a matter of damage in the case of a fire or a flood or anything else like that. So they may be in a drawer, but what if where that drawer is flooded? You know what I mean? True, they're probably, if they're jewelry, they're metal, they're probably fine. But what if they're damaged in some way as a result of that? And you have to have that.
Certainly. That makes so much sense. The idea of even mentally reframing the idea of insurance, not, what's the least I can pay and get by, but rather what can I pay and continue my life as should things occur.
Which definitely brings me to my next point, is deciding on how high you're going to make those limits versus how that's going to affect your premium per month. So many people I know are always after the cheapest policy. They're like, I just need to buy something. I need to buy something. If a disaster strikes and they don't have enough coverage, then what was the point? What was the point of just buying anything? You've paid all this money into something that isn't going to help you enough. So true, we all need to weigh out our budgets and everything else. Do consider how increasing the limits will affect your premium and how that will affect your regular budget. And that's something that we all have to balance out with.
100%. No, that makes so much sense. You summed it all up very well.
I think that's all I would say on that topic. I'm happy to answer any questions. If any of your viewers feel like reaching out, emailing us, asking us for help to see if we can look at their policy with them. Again, we're not insurance experts. We're not brokers. We're not agents. We're not any of those things. Don't have any certifications in the insurance world. We do have lots of experience in working with insurance companies and working with homeowners and resolving property disasters, hazardous disasters. So we'll be happy to help.
That is great. I know I say this every time, but I sincerely mean it here as well. I truly learned a lot today, Veronika. That was really interesting. Now I feel like I got to go look at my own policy here in my apartment. I have no idea. All right. Well, once again, on behalf of Website Depot, as ever, my name's Greg Benevent. Take it easy. Have a good night.
Bye.